Okay, Michael Chong, thank you so much for joining me today.
Great to be here.
Let me just start out by talking about, I guess, the changing face of your riding. It has
Yeah,
changed since you last ran. You are now running to be, at least in part, a representative of Guelph. Um, can you talk a bit about, I guess, let's just introduce you first, because one of the reasons why you are kind of the Wellington of Wellington-Halton Hills. You always have been because refresh my memory. You weren't born in Fergus, but you spent most of your life in Fergus.
that's right. I was born in Windsor,
Hmm.
but at a very young age, my parents moved to Wellington County, to Nickel Township, which is the old township that surrounded Fergus. So that's where I grew up and went to school.
Right. And after university, you went back and I guess planted your flag there, as it were.
Yeah, I went to U of T, met my wife Carrie at U of T, spent about 10 years working in the city, and mostly in financial services in the banking sector. In IT, and then I went back home to run, and I won the election in 2004.
Hmm. So let me just talk about the how the writing has changed then. From your perspective, uh, is there a marked difference between the way the writing is configured now, as opposed to the way it's been the last, almost 20 years you've been an MP? I guess how has adding Guelph to your writing sort of changed your game?
Not a lot. We've essentially swapped out Georgetown for Guelph. That's essentially what happened. I obviously didn't have anything to do with it. It's set by a independent electoral boundaries commission. Every 10 years, this three-person commission is established for each province. They redraw the boundaries in order to account for population changes. And so, because Georgetown had grown significantly over the past 20 years, parts of it most of it had to be removed, and I got a much smaller part in its replacement in the south end of Guelph.
Hmm. Well, smaller for now. We will definitely see growth there over the next few years. I'm curious though, because people who may not know, you have established a campaign office in the southern end of Guelph as well. And I have noticed you've been doing a lot of door knocking in South Guelph. Um, how are you introducing yourself to those residents? They may know your name, they may know you, recognize you as being an MP from a neighboring riding, but now you're introducing to themselves proper and asking you to be their
Yeah.
representative now.
Well, I it's been a delight to knock on doors at the south end of Guelph and introduce myself to voters there. Many of them were unaware that the boundary had changed, and that several of
Mm.
them expressed delight that I was going to be their candidate and indicated they were voting for me. So that has been really heartening to hear. Um, just talking to a lot of people who've more recently moved into the south end of Guelph. As you know, it's a newer part of the city of Guelph.
Hmm.
Talking about their concerns. I've got strong connections to Guelph. My parents both worked in Guelph for many years. My mother is a nurse, and my father is a physician. He worked for 30 years as part of a group of six internists at
Mm.
Guelph General and the old St. Joseph's hospitals.
Wow.
And so many of the older people in the city will remember my father and his colleagues that served many of the residents of Guelph and Wellington County for many years.
Just to rewind a bit, is that kind of has that kind of fallen on you a bit and some of your volunteers to have to be like elections Canada ambassadors to explain that there's been a redrawing?
A little bit. The last householder I sent out as member of parliament for Wellington-Halton Hills, the old riding, it was largely about the redraw of the boundaries because a lot of people weren't aware that the boundaries had been redrawn. So we did that. We've also been communicating that at the doors as well. So I think people are fairly aware now. Basically, anything south of Arkle Road in the city of Guelph is now part of the new riding, and parts of Guelph west of the Hanlon Expressway
That's right.
are also part of the new riding. So south of 24, west of the Hanlon, and south of Arkle Road are all part of the new riding. So it's a pretty easy boundary to understand, and we're getting out there, knocking on doors, and telling people one on one what's happening.
Well, you clearly speak like a man who's had to explain that several hundred times, but I'll move on. Um, as we're recording, your party leader,
Mhm,
Mr.
mhm,
Polyev, was announcing the party platform.
mhm.
I want to get from your point of view because you and Mr. Polyev came up in kind of the same time, became MPs about the same time, and have been colleagues for several years. For people who may not know him as well as you, can you talk about the Pierre Polyev you know and what makes him
Yeah.
good prime minister material?
Yeah. The Pierre Polyev I know is somebody who's married to a refugee, a Venezuelan refugee who fled Venezuela with her family at a very young age, moved to a foreign city, a foreign language, in moving to Montreal, Quebec. She was raised obviously in Venezuela as a Spanish speaker, and arrives to Montreal having to learn French overnight as a young girl. She and her family lived in a basement apartment, all of them, very crammed quarters, but they made their way and eventually uh, integrated into Montreal life and, became the success that she is today. She's a wonderful woman, but she brings to her the experiences that millions of Canadians have brought with them as they move from their old countries of birth to a new country. They've got two children together. One of them is autistic and nonverbal. So, Pierre spends a lot of time, as does Anna, with their children. And he understands the challenges of raising children that many families face. Um, I've known Pierre for 2 decades, and he's a hardworking MP who, through different swings in elections, has re-earned the trust of the people of his riding in Ottawa. He's an Ottawa MP, so he understands cities and challenges in Ontario because he's represented a riding in Ontario for the past 2 decades.
Hmm. What's something about Pierre Polyev that would surprise people that you know?
I think one of the things that would surprise people is that, Pierre was born to a 16-year-old mother who gave him up for adoption to two school teachers, and they raised him. His father is his adoptive father is gay, and Pierre fully loves him and fully embraces that and supports gay marriage. Pierre is pro-choice, and so I think that would surprise many people.
Hmm. What would surprise people about you? You're a known quantity.
I don't know. I hope nothing. Well, I guess I've got a story that I think is it's a story I remember fondly um, because it is quite funny. So obviously, I was born to a Chinese immigrant father and a Dutch immigrant mother, which wasn't a common marriage back in the 1960s when they got married. So I
Hmm.
was born in 1971, and my father was at work all the time. As an internist working in Guelph and in the in Fergus hospitals, and so my mother consequently raised me, one on one with a lot of time spent together as a baby and a toddler. So she spoke to me in Dutch quite frequently. And so when I went to Ponsonby Public School, which is down the road from where I live now, for kindergarten, I entered that kindergarten class and they did a speech evaluation on me. And I couldn't pronounce very many words, but they didn't know I was half Dutch. So they thought I had a speech impediment. And so
Oh,
they were
wow.
going to send me for remedial speech therapy until my mother or my father called up the school and said, no, 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 his mom's Dutch. That's the issue here. So I always thought that's kind of a cute, funny story.
No, I like that story. I guess, maybe small wonder then you sort of found a niche as the shadow cabinet member for talking about foreign affairs. I think it would not be outside the realm of possibility to say if a conservative government, you would be a compelling choice for that role. So I want to just play pretend for a minute. Given the international picture, the international situation, um, what would your advice to the prime minister be if you were a foreign affairs minister about, I mean, not just obviously there's a big situation south of the border. There's war in Ukraine, war in Gaza, other international pressures. We have Russia, China, Iran. But I mean, when you're looking at the general international picture, what do you see?
Well, I go back to Canadians. So let's start with Canadians. What is the biggest challenge we are facing as Canadians? And I think the biggest challenge is the economy. I think we are at risk of losing our prosperity, our growth, our ability to afford the basics of life. As you know, the cost of housing, the cost of rent, the cost to purchase a home, the cost to save for a down payment has doubled over the past decade. Uh, our economy on a per capita basis has been in decline for the last 2 years. I think National Bank Financial, Royal Bank of Canada, other banks have highlighted in their economic analysis that our per capita GDP has shrunk 8 of the 9 last quarters. I think it's down 4% over those 24 months or 28 months. And so we have a real economic crisis on our hands, made even worse by the threat of the Trump tariffs. So I think a whole of government approach is needed to turn this economy around, and that includes our foreign policy.
Mm,
So I think the focus of our foreign policy should be to drive our economic interests. More specifically, I think all of the 10,000 plus civil servants who work in the Department of Foreign Affairs, both here and abroad, need to have a single-minded mission, which is to promote Canada's exports, to promote two-way trade and investment, to get our economy moving. So that should be the singular focus, not just of our foreign policy, but of all parts of the government of Canada.
hmm So I guess is the way you're framing this is, I mean, Trump is kind of a gravitational force on his own, but outside of Donald Trump, these are Canadian problems that need Canadian solutions, regardless of who's in the White House or not.
Yeah, I think we're more vulnerable at this moment in time because of our weak economy. I think we would be in a much better position if the government had put in place different economic policy several years ago. Look,
Hmm
don't take this from me. It's easy for a partisan to criticize, the other party's agenda, but here's an example of independent analysis that highlights how bad the situation is. I mentioned the analysis from Royal Bank and from National Bank Financial, but look at the Financial Times of London's analysis. So the Financial Times is one of the world's leading business newspapers, often considered the gold standard for business and investment reporting. They did an analysis last spring, just a year ago, of the top 50 OECD economies. So the OECD is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in Europe.
hmm
It's based in Europe, but it's funded by governments of advanced economies around the world, and it provides unbiased, nonpartisan economic research and advice. So this particular columnist at the Financial Times did an analysis of the top 50 OECD economies and their recovery from the pandemic. So their economic performance over the last 4 years. And what he discovered was that Canada ranked dead last out of 50 leading OECD economies.
hmm
And as a consequence, publications like The Economist are highlighting how Canada's per capita GDP has now fallen behind states like Alabama's, one of the poorest states in the United States. So we are in trouble. We have, housing crisis. We've got an affordability crisis. We're seeing tent cities pop up everywhere. Social services and our healthcare system is under strain. Uh, and it all goes back to our economy, because if we
hmm
can't get the economy moving and it's in decline, our ability to pay for social services, to pay for healthcare, to pay for education is at risk. So that's why it's so urgent that we get this economy turned around.
I'm curious just to drill a little further on this though. A lot of those same reports you're talking about, a lot of those same organizations will point to like the recovery of the United States coming out of the pandemic and how it was on the top end. And there seems to be this kind of general friction between what economists say and what financial reporters say and what people feel, the sort of vibe session feeling, if you will. I'm wondering, I guess, how do you reconcile? Because I have a feeling that if our numbers from those independent organizations were better, we would still be having this feeling of kind of like general economic malaise. I think a lot of those issues would still exist because I think because and I don't want to sound like a partisan either, but because the guys in the boardrooms might be doing really well, it doesn't necessarily mean that the guys on the factory floor are doing that well either.
Well, I think you've raised a very important point, Adam. The guys in the boardrooms have done very well
Hmm.
because what has happened over the last several years is that people with assets have done incredibly well. We've seen massive asset appreciation in everything in assets like housing to the stock market to the bond market. So people who own assets like stocks and bonds, real estate have done incredibly well. The problem is on the P&L, so to speak. So
Mm.
people who have assets on the balance sheet and low liabilities have done incredibly well. But people who have few assets and who are just starting out in life, young families starting out who don't have very many assets, are doing terribly. And that's because on our P&L, on our profit and loss statement, we have no income growth. We've got no appreciable growth uh, in per capita in GDP. In fact, it's been declining. And at the same time, on the asset side of things, on real estate, they're seeing the price of housing go ever further and further up. So I think what you've observed is very true. People who are comfortable, who have assets, who have low debt, they've done quite well over the last several years. It's people who are starting out in life, the millennials, who are struggling and saying we need a change. And they're right.
Hmm.
We shouldn't be relying on ever increasing asset values to create our prosperity and growth. That's not sustainable. We need to increase wages. We need to increase per capita GDP. So I think what you've observed, as I said, is very true.
Then, what is in the conservative platform then
Yeah.
that helps sort of rebalance that equation?
Well, so we're proposing to cut the price of housing. Several of the big initiatives we're proposing are to eliminate the GST on new houses. So that will save roughly $65,000 on the purchase of a new home. We're also proposing to incentivize municipalities to cut their development charges.
Hmm.
Development charges have skyrocketed across Southern Ontario over the past 2 decades. It wasn't long ago that a typical development charge for a house charged by a municipality was about $25,000. Now, for that same detached house, it's often 3, 4 times that level, and that's embedded into the price of a house. So we're going to incentivize municipalities to cut those development charges by paying for half the reduction that they put in place. And so
Mm.
we think that that's a way to help incentivize them to reduce those costs, which will be passed along to new home buyers. So, that's one area that we're focused on to help reduce the cost of living. The other is cutting taxes on income and investment. We have a problem in not, we haven't been able as an economy to attract domestic or foreign investment. And at
Mm.
the end of the day, you need that investment in order to drive uh, purchase of plant, machinery, and equipment, investments in information and communications technologies, investments in process reengineering, all the kind of investments you need to increase output per labor hour worked. In other words, to increase productivity, which has been a big problem. So one of the reasons why billions of dollars of investments have avoided Canada over the last several years is our high taxes.
Mm.
And so we need to reduce income taxes. We need to reduce taxes on investment to attract more money here so that it can be invested in plant capital and equipment.
I want to then get into sort of maybe where your party's hitting the roadblock, or at least has hit a roadblock, and since Mr. Trump has returned to the White House, which is it feels like people are, whether we're talking about the recent Ontario election or we're talking about this election, people are embracing like stability and not changing things and not shaking things up because there's so much instability and shaking things up elsewhere. So for people who you may encounter out there who are like, I kind of like what you're saying. Maybe we need a change, but on the other hand, I'm I'm up to my ears in change, and maybe now's not the time. Oh, why shake up the government now? Why put a new prime minister, largely new party in power in this sort of crucial moment?
Well, it's a great question. Quite simply, because what has been happening over the last 10 years is not working. The policies of the government, of the Liberal government over the past 10 years aren't working. They're not working on housing. They're not working on crime. They're not working on increasing economic growth. They're not working on job creation. And we see the results everywhere. And what Mr. Carney is proposing is more of the same. It's the same policies. In fact, Mona Fortier, the Liberal MP who helped write the platform, said the platform was written before Mark Carney was even leader. 20 of 23 cabinet ministers in the Carney cabinet are Trudeau cabinet ministers. All of his MPs, with the exception of maybe one or two new MPs that he's recruited, all of the MPs that are seeking re-election, I think it's over 150 of them, were in Trudeau's caucus. So it's the same Liberal Party proposing the same policies that are going to lead to the same results, which is more economic decline, more crime that goes unprosecuted, and more challenges for day-to-day affordability for workers and families.
I want to flip that around. You've been in government for 20 years. Why shouldn't people embrace change, especially with the new riding, and say, Michael Chong, you've been great. Thank you for your service. We want to try someone new. Why depend on the steady leadership of Michael Chong for this riding?
Well, I think my record speaks for itself. I've stood up for the things that constituents in Wellington County and in Halton Hills believe in. I don't hesitate to, take a stand to represent them on the floor of the House of Commons, even if that from time to time is at odds with the party or the party leader. I believe that MPs should first and foremost represent their constituents. That is our most important job. Because in Canada, you don't vote for a prime minister and you don't vote for a senator. You get one vote at the federal level, and that's for your locally elected member of parliament. And that's why that member needs to make sure that always the views of their constituents, the interests of their constituents come first. I tell people this story because I think it highlights the constitutional foundation of why MPs need to put their constituents first.
Hmm.
For much of our history, if you were appointed to the federal cabinet as an MP, you had to resign your seat as an MP and seek re-election in a by-election in your riding to get the approval of your constituents to wear a second hat. Because when you serve in cabinet, your number one responsibility as a cabinet minister isn't to your constituents. It's actually to serve, with the prime minister, the national interest. And that may often be at odds with the local interest. And so up till the 1930s in Canada, you had to resign your local seat and actually seek the consent of the voters in your riding, your constituents, to wear two hats, to represent them, but also to be a federal cabinet minister. And so we did away with that tradition in the 1930s. But I think it was a good tradition because I think it reinforced the idea that MP's number one job is to represent their constituents.
I think I knew that, but it's a good reminder about how we used to look at these things. Before I let you go, what's one issue that is maybe like personally important to you that you want to make sure that you talk about before the election's over? What is like in Michael Chong's personal election platform?
Well, I think the most important thing in this election is driving home the point that we are in a very vulnerable, weak position as a country. Our per capita GDP has been declining for some time. Our productivity growth has been flatlining, if not declining. And this is the foundation of our prosperity. And if we don't reverse these trends, we will be in real trouble 5, 10 years out. And so that's why I strongly believe that we need a change in Ottawa. We need to shake things up. We need a new approach to turn things around so that we can deal with foreign threats from a position of strength.
Hmm. Well, Michael, I appreciate all of your time today, and I guess, a little less than a week to go until we see the result. But for anyone who still has yet to make up their mind and would like to learn more about you or the Conservative Party platform, where can people get that information?
They can go to chong.ca. Uh, Everything is there. They can call us, email us, find out more about the platform through the links on that page.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you again for your time today, Michael. Welcome to Guelph, officially, I guess, and we will see what happens on Monday. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Adam.